because when someone's in survival mode, they're shifted and they're overstimulated, they're shifted into that default mode network.
Yes.
So basically their brain says, do what you've always done, believe what you've always believed, think what you've always thought, because it's kept you alive until now. And anything new, novel, or different is a threat to your survival because it's the unknown. So we narrow our bandwidth and we shut down anything that might differ from kind of where we're at.
Love it if you could share your perspective on exactly what our mental health crisis is, and what are some indicators people can use to determine if indeed they are in a mental health crisis.
Well, the levels of anxiety and depression and suicide and obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, the amount of medications being prescribed for a lot of these related illnesses has shot through the roof over the last, I would say, maybe decade or so. But my guess is during this pandemic, it's skyrocketed even more with the amount of stress and confusion going on. So for me, I do think that just the levels of, anxiety, depression, a lot of these ailments has increased dramatically for a wide variety of reasons. I feel as though food quality plays a huge role. People are eating so much more processed food. There's so much more chemicals and pesticides sprayed on our food. I think from a young age, the amount of antibiotics that children are given and their gut microbiome being very disrupted, and their neurotransmitter and hormone production as a result of things like that, whether it's poor food quality or chemicals and pesticides, antibiotic use, things like that. The amount of environmental toxicity has shot through the roof. So a lot of what we've talked about and how the body and the mind interface with one another, I think just with our general health declining, like you were talking about earlier, that has increased the mental, emotional health crisis more than anything, is just general health being, on the decline. I also feel as though in terms of identifying if someone might be struggling with something, what are some of the indicators? I had some interesting thoughts that were coming up when I was pondering that question. Number one is, which was one of the 5 shamanic questions that you ask your clients, is the inability to be alone.
Yes.
I think if you have the inability to be alone for an extended period of time and that creates stress inside of you, I think that's an indicator of some sort of mental health challenge or because there's parts of you that you're disengaging from or disintegrating from or disassociating from. So being alone, you actually have to, engage the mirror, so to speak. So I think if you have a hard time being alone, that's probably an indicator of one of these health challenges. Also, the addiction to any substance. I remember, you were doing a podcast once and you said, if you want to know what your God is, ask what you can't live a couple of days without.
Yes.
So I think the bigger and bigger that list becomes, the more there's an indicator of some sort of mental health challenge or mental emotional challenge. Also, the dysregulation in people's nervous systems. One thing that I see is so important is people are living in a constant fight or flight state. Our whole culture at large is living in a constant stress response. And I think anyone that's constantly living in a stress response is basically living in survival mode. So if you're living in survival mode, you're way more susceptible to all of these mental health challenges because the mind, its number one focus is survival. So the more you're under stress, the more hypervigilance there is in the mind. And the more you open the door for things like ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, things like that. Also, if you're constantly seeing patterns in your life that keep repeating themselves, whether they're in relationships or injuries or in your career and finances, whatever it might be, if you see constant patterns either repeating themselves or you're aware of consistent patterns of self-sabotage, that to me is an indicator that there might be some sort of mental health challenge. And there's basically a compensation pattern as a result of it that's creating a lot of these scenarios and situations that are manifesting in your life. So there's a list of a couple. And one thing that was actually coming up for me recently that I think is not really talked about all that much in the mainstream is I actually think there's a large percentage of highly evolved souls that are incarnating right now.
Yes, I
from
agree.
Dimensions of very high energies and frequencies and vibrations. And I actually think that those souls of very high frequency and vibration coming into a body and coming into form. And a lot of those children might not know how to navigate that level of frequency as a container in a body. So I think there's, a lot of children that don't know how to manage that energetic frequency within the container of a body. So they're learning how to navigate that. They're probably very powerful healers, but I think I've worked with a lot of young children who are very psychic, who do a lot of healing work that connect to, beings of high dimensions, but they have a lot of anxiety. They have a lot of panic attacks just because they haven't really learned how to embody. They're used to not having a body.
Right.
So they haven't yet learned how to be the container of that level of frequency or that level of vibration. So I do think, some of the work I do is actually working with clients, young children who do have a lot of those innate abilities, and actually teaching them how to become the container of that and not basically, lose your shit with anxiety and panic, and be able to really hold a vibrational frequency of a very, high level. So I actually think that's something that's not really talked about, but I do feel like it's actually very relevant with kids like 7 to, 16, 17 years old right now.
Yes. And even younger.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of people are unaware of that was going on, and personally, I think it was part of the strategy. Are you aware that from the very beginning of the lockdowns, while they had everybody out of schools, they were putting 5G towers up everywhere? Almost every school. Yes. So you're talking about a frequency that's very disruptive to the human body, and that disturbs the water molecules. The water molecules are wickedly sensitive to vibration. There's nothing more sensitive to vibration than a water molecule in nature. And so it's literally oscillating and changing the polarity of the cells at the speed of that vibration. So we're kind of like all in a microwave oven, just buzzing like shit. And then when you consider that most vaccinations have mercury in them, a lot of them have aluminum in them. There's a lot of reports from investigators that there's graphene in some of the new ones, which I did research on it. And the first thing that I found that made it dead obvious to me what was going on, and it said graphene is capable of sending and receiving a wide range of electromagnetic frequencies. So you think of how many people have metal in their teeth, who wear earrings, nose rings, belly button rings, who have metal in their body from surgical repair, who have not detoxified the mercury amalgam in their body and have mercury all throughout their nervous system, who have aluminum from can liners, from cooking ware, nickel. I mean, having done countless environmental toxicity evaluations through functional medicine on people, I think I can count the number of people on one hand that didn't have heavy metal poisoning. So imagine what happens when you have highly conductive metals and substances inside your body, and they're launching 26,000 5G satellites that's going to blanket this planet. And if I know in your podcast with Kyle, he mentioned Arthur Furstenberg's book, The Invisible Rainbow. I mean, when you start studying that book, it's just shocking. And the list of, so the point I'm driving at, I mean, wouldn't you agree that there's a huge capacity for mental, emotional disturbance due to the fact that people not only are being bathed in this field of high vibration energy that's not doesn't interface with our human body. It's it's not something we ever encountered in nature. And also, when you consider all the heavy metal toxicity and what's in a lot of these vaccines, it just turns you into an electric circuit, like a light bulb being lit up 24 hours a day.
Yeah. And the more you overstimulate the system and the more toxicity you create in the system, the less bandwidth people have to navigate the world, the less bandwidth they have to navigate the everyday stressors of life.
Yes.
And also the less bandwidth they have to process challenging emotions, to work with, the everyday challenges of life. And also what we're seeing right now is a lot of polarization in terms of people's belief systems, a lot of conflict. And the more overstimulated people are with social media, the electromagnetics, toxicity, pollution, things like that, the less bandwidth they have to integrate any new idea or any new information. Because when someone's in survival mode, they're shifted and they're overstimulated, they're shifted into that default mode network.
Yes.
So basically their brain says, do what you've always done, believe what you've always believed, think what you've always thought, because it's kept you alive until now. And anything new, novel, or different is a threat to your survival because it's the unknown. So we narrow our bandwidth and we shut down anything that might differ from kind of where we're at. So there's so many ways in which the overstimulation, not just on a physical level, but a mental, emotional level, on the level of the nervous system, and how the ego can actually process anything new or novel is really interesting. So that's where, a lot of the work in the program and a lot of the work, in my coaching practice and in your 1, 2, 3, 4 model that you teach at the CHEK Institute, number 2 is balancing the two forces, balancing the nervous system. And to me, that's a prerequisite when it comes to healing from anything, is just creating balance in someone's system so then they can start doing the work. But the overstimulation, especially the electromagnetic pollution, makes it impossible to balance that unless you're a high level yogi where you can transcend those energies. But, circling back to what we started with, which is connecting with nature and grounding, that's even more essential right now, because once you get your bare feet connected to the earth and you ground yourself, you start, allowing a lot of that electromagnetic pollution to be pulled and drained and neutralized from your body. So that's where right now grounding and connecting with the earth is absolutely essential.